Welcome to the Weather Insights Podcast. I'm meteorologist Scott Pitney, along with meteorologist Jeff Lindner. And this is Wednesday, June 19th. And Jeff, now we finally, after many days of waiting, we have Tropical Storm Alberto. Alberto has formed in the Western Gulf. Well, I should say it's been there, but it has officially formed into a tropical storm with maximum sustained winds of 40 miles per hour. Picked up a little bit of movement. I think yesterday it was around 5 miles per hour, basically stationary. It's moving west-northwest at 9 miles per hour now, and expected to make landfall sometime tonight or early tomorrow morning, right there, almost where you see it there, where the red indicator is for Alberto. I'm trying to get used to that circle with a tropical storm. That's that's throwing me off a little bit because tropical storms don't really have an eye like that with a hurricane. But I'll get used to it eventually. But anyway, it's going to be moving into Mexico, and like we've been saying most of the week, the convection and the wind and all of that is north of the system, but it's got a little better defined eye now, and the bands are still out there, but it is a little more concentrated in the center as it moves on shore. They're picking up heavier winds and higher winds and heavier squalls down in South Texas today. I know South Padre Island has been getting pounded by wind, surf, and rain, and that is going to continue because it has picked up speed, but it is moving slow enough where it's going to continue to dump a lot of rain, especially for South Texas. And Jeff, I was also glad to see that, with the models trending, with the rain amounts moving further south, Central Texas was losing a lot of that. We all want to see Central Texas bust their drought, and it's not going to bust their drought, but they are getting some of those bands in Central Texas now, so they are getting some rain. You see it on radar here. See those bands that have been coming across Galveston Island all day and continue to come across Houston, and then stretching out over to Louisiana. Of course, it's a lot more broken, but and then even further beyond Louisiana, there's showers and thunderstorms all the way over to Mississippi. But you can see the heavier concentration of convection there to the northwest of Houston, and heavier bands of rain down there around Matagorda Bay, moving into the crossroads. And it's kind of out of the radar range, but if you see what's moving into the crossroads there, that's kind of the type of activity they're getting south. So the rain amounts have been interesting this morning. It almost looked like this whole thing was going to be a bust for Houston Metro, but we do have some rain amounts now on the west side of Houston Metro that have actually gone over an inch, Jeff.
Hey, I'm just happy it's raining. I'm just happy. I'm just happy it finally rained in Houston, and it wasn't a complete, we didn't have complete dry cement today. I'm gonna step back one slide and just talk about this for a minute, because I have a feeling we're gonna be talking about this a lot this season. But the Bay of Campeche is just such a favorable place for tropical systems to get going. And, this thing has really, you can just look at the satellite today and you can see this thing consolidating down there. And what's interesting about this area of the Gulf of Mexico is the shape and the curvature of the coastline actually helps to enhance and tighten some of the circulation down here. So you can see the coastline curves in a counterclockwise direction. And so when you have low pressure up here to the north, you can get these bands and tighten up this low pressure system. And that's exactly what's happened. That's exactly what's happened today. And, if this thing had some more time over water with the upper level outflow we have, with the warm sea surface temperatures, this thing would really probably take off, but it just doesn't have a lot of time. It's going to be inland here, like you mentioned, in Mexico, late tonight or tomorrow morning, crossing the coast. And so it's just going to run out of time. And that tends to be a lot of what we see down in the Bay of Campeche is the systems down here can really get their act together quickly, but they usually run out of time before they can get too powerful. And of course, the weird thing about this system has been how broad it is. We're talking winds extending outward 400 miles from the center. And you notice that rain you just saw there on the radar up in Houston. Look at this feeder band. Look at this bad boy. This thing extends all the way out here in the Gulf of Mexico, hundreds of miles. And this is the type of concern we get with these types of systems where you get these feeder bands that can come in and create, here's a classic example. You have one feeder band here coming in Galveston Island up through downtown, Northwest Harris out towards Sealy. Here you have another big feeder band coming into Port O'Connor and this area down here. And they've had a lot of rain down here. We'll talk about that in a second. Yeah. But this is such a hallmark of tropical systems. It's those feeder bands. And up here on the upper mid-Texas coast, we're on that, what we call the dirty side of it, the northern flank of it, where we get this onshore push and these kind of feeder bands that develop, and also the tides. And so taking a look at the rainfall, this is from Texas Water Development Board. They got a great network of gauges, and you're able to overlay the rainfall with the gauges. And oh, look at this! Imagine that the heavy rains missed the gauges here down in the coastal bend. But look at some of these numbers that the radar's keying in on that we've had. Aransas County down to San Patricio County, Refugio County, back into Calhoun County. We're talking 6 to even an isolated 8-inch amount. And again, this is big bands coming in. Surface observations with gauges, with actual, measurements, almost 5 inches up here in the northern part of San Patricio County. So we're seeing the heavy rains. And for the coastal bend in South Texas, this is kind of the start. They're going to continue to see heavy rains overnight. And even up here on the upper Texas coast, we've seen the heavy rains, especially this afternoon. And like we've been talking about the last couple of days, it was going to be this really tight gradient between several inches of rainfall and virtually nothing. And if you look north of Houston, virtually nothing has happened today. You look southwest of Houston, that's where we've had the rain. Anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 inches of rain. The radar actually has been showing a little bit more. We're just going to zoom in again, and these bands are not very big. You're talking miles across versus a big area. So you can get really heavy rains and go right to the edge of that band, and you're only talking 1.8 inches versus 3 or 4 inches right in this area right here. And so that's the type of system we're dealing with. And like you mentioned, out here in the hill country, even out here in Fayette County, now getting up towards the I-35 corridor, and the rain has just started there this evening, getting into some of that rainfall. This is exactly what you need out here in Central Texas. It's not a big heavy rain event, flash flood event. It's a good soaking rainfall, and that will really, really help with the drought conditions. It won't produce a lot of runoff. It probably won't make a lot of difference in the lake levels, but certainly is helpful. And boy, for the farmers down here in the coastal bend in South Texas, you couldn't ask for anything better right now. We've gotten away with not a lot of flooding and really beneficial rainfall for the ag industry down here in South Texas. I mean, they were looking good, going into this right now, and they needed some rain. Boy, they're going to be looking really good coming out of this week. So good stuff. It's not all bad news all the time. Here on the Weather Insights podcast, it's not all bad news, right? One thing to talk about though is the tides. We have certainly been dealing with coastal flooding today. Starting late last night, we've had a lot of impacts on the upper Texas coast from Sargent and Matagorda Bay all the way up through Galveston Bay, Galveston Island, and High Island, and over to Sabine Pass. A lot of coastal flooding, Surfside, Treasure Island, Quintana Beach, all having big issues this morning. Blue Water Highway completely overtopped, overwashed, debris on it. Highway 87 overwashed, debris on it. Galveston Bolivar Ferry had to suspend operations. They couldn't dock at the landings. So we've had big issues today with the tides, and you're looking at the 2 to 4 feet. Doesn't sound very bad. That's 2 to 4 feet above normally dry ground. And then you add wave action on that, and so we've had issues today. The tides really haven't come down a whole lot over the past couple of hours or so, and so this graphic didn't hold like I was hoping it was going to do. So I'll try to pull it up here, but these are the current elevations, and we're still dealing with going into low tide. We're heading towards low tide, 3-4 feet of water on the coast. And so we still have issues down on the coast, and we're going to go back into that high tide on Thursday morning up until about noon tomorrow. So while it's probably not going to be as bad tomorrow morning, we are still going to have impacts on the coast. And some of these folks down on the coast have been dealing with water now for 24 hours. And so, we've been more confident on the tidal impacts of this and the gusty winds on the coast and the seas and all that type of stuff. And we haven't been overly confident on the rainfall part of it. And that's kind of played out exactly how we expected. So we've certainly had the issues today with tides. Coastal flood warning has been extended until 7 p.m. tomorrow evening. And again, I think the worst of this is going to be tomorrow morning. I don't think it's going to be as bad as this morning. I think it will be equal or lower to what you had this morning. But again, some of these areas and some of this infrastructure now has been inundated. We're talking 20. We're coming up to 24 hours or so with water into areas here along the coast, and so you can't sleep on these tides. And I know we kind of glanced over it a little bit, but we do have this potential down here in the southern Gulf of Mexico for this weekend for a somewhat similar system to kind of develop, kind of a broad system. The good news is the high pressure is not in the same place, and the moisture is not in the same place. And so it doesn't look like we're going to get this big gradient. It doesn't look like we're going to get these big tides on the upper Texas coast, these gusty winds. But we still could have impacts. And if you look at kind of the tidal forecast all the way through the weekend, they're not to levels like we have seen, but they're still high. And so even if you're planning to go to the beach this weekend, do stuff like that. I've had a couple questions. Hey, how does things look down on Galveston this weekend? I think we're still going to have some elevated water and some rough conditions down there. It's not anything what we're experiencing now, but there may not be a whole lot of beach, if you will, this weekend and into early next week as we kind of get this secondary system trying to form here in the southern Gulf of Mexico. And again, this looks to stay mainly south of Texas right now.
Yeah. And, Jeff, a couple of things come to mind too. Why are the tides so high around our area when we're so far from the center of the storm? And we've talked about the long wind fetch and this just constant east wind gradient blowing up into Galveston. The other thing too is, the water is much more shallow here. So the tide has a much greater effect than it does, say, South Padre Island, where it gets deep a lot faster when you go out. So that's another thing that we're dealing with here, why we have those high tides, especially in the along the upper Texas coast.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if we look back at this, you can also kind of imagine here from roughly about Matagorda Bay over to South Central Louisiana. This is kind of a concave shape of the coast, so it's kind of a upside down sea, or however you want to look at it. And so when you bring these easterly winds or southeasterly winds in here, that's very favorable for piling the water up on the upper Texas coast. And so it's one of the reasons why we get really big storm surges up here. We're extraordinarily storm surge prone. And we talk about this all the time, and this storm is really the example of it. Is not to focus on where the center is, not to focus on where the cone is, but look at the impacts. We're 500, 600 miles away from the center, and we're having more impacts on the upper Texas coast and Galveston Bay than what they're going to see on the eastern coast of Mexico, where the center comes in. And so it's all about the impacts, not where the cone. And I've honestly gotten away this week from sharing a lot of the cone. We didn't even share it here today, right, of the cone graphics, because it really doesn't matter at this point where the center goes. It honestly doesn't really matter that it was named today. We've been talking about that all week. It's more at this point of formality.
Exactly. Jeff, great stuff. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for watching. Just want to remind you to subscribe to our Weather Insights YouTube channel. Subscribe and share. Make sure your friends, your family stay up to date on the latest in the tropics, and be sure to join us on the next Weather Insights podcast.